Talk About It live stream talk show that is streamed on Facebook and YouTube each Thursday evening at 8 p.m. As you know, we have seen with our own eyes through numerous videos the unjust and inhumane treatment of individuals in police custody. We must admit that what we have viewed the unjust and inhumane treatment of individuals in police custody. We must admit that what we have viewed the unjust and mute everybody for right now. Mute all at the bottom. We must admit that what we have viewed the unjust. Mute everybody for right now. Mute all at the bottom. We must admit that what we have viewed has at the very least turned our stomachs. The brutal and life-snatching treatment has been unacceptable by any means, notwithstanding the lack of actions taken by various police departments around this nation. And let's not be fooled. This dehumanizing behavior has been ongoing for many, many years. We just were not privy to the footage. However, the spotlight has now been turned on, and citizens around this world have been getting an eyeful of unjust actions displayed by men and women who hold the badge and authority to enforce the law. Now, many have said that there are just a few bad apples in the barrel, making it look bad for everybody. And perhaps that may just be true. A few bad apples. However, when a few bad apples have been left in the barrel, it poses a danger to the entire barrel. In fact, any responsible farmer with an orchard who finds a tree that is producing rotten fruit bears the responsibility of taking appropriate action. He or she must first conduct a thorough investigation, determine what action is needed, and then apply it. It could be as simple as adding some type of nutritional supplement to the tree or its roots itself. Moreover, there may need to be a pruning of the affected limbs. And in a worst case scenario, the tree just may need to be cut down and burned. You see, if that infected tree is not appropriately dealt with, it stands in jeopardy of contaminating and eventually destroying the entire orchard. I am a member of the cloth, so allow me to say here that even the Holy Scriptures declare in St. John chapter 15, verse 2, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it so that it may bear more fruit. So what am I saying? We need a real and productive conversation, specifically about police reform. I know, and I do not expect that all the questions will be asked or even answered tonight. However, I hope that we can begin the conversation about it with expectancy to coming to some type of enacted laws in the name of justice. And so, there is a term that all of us are familiar with. The wording used when a person is read the Miranda warning, also known as being Mirandanized. It is clear and direct. This is what it says. You have the right to remain silent. Anything that you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand the rights that I have just read to you? With these rights in mind, do you wish to speak with me? But on this evening, none of you in our panel are being Mirandized. I indeed hope that you will not remain silent. What you say, we do understand that it is your opinion and probably not that of your employer. We are not in a court of law, but some public opinion. And certainly no attorney is needed. So I encourage you to share your views, express your opinion, and by all means, your expertise and any facts that you feel would be helpful in the viewers obtaining a better understanding of the police reform and alike. Allow me to say for the record, others have been invited to this participation forum, but they chose not to do so. With that being said, I hand over the reins to this town hall to the capable, esteemed moderator, Ms. Tiffany Majors, who is the president and CEO of the Greater Baltimore Urban League. Welcome, Ms. Majors.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Mason. And I am grateful for the honor of being the moderator for this very important town hall that we're having today on police reform. I would first like to welcome all of our guests, our panelists. I'd like to welcome Dr. Hillary Shelton, Director of NAACP, the Washington Bureau, and Senior Vice President of Policy and Advocacy. I'd like to welcome Councilman Julian Jones, Baltimore County Baltimore County Council, District 4. I'd like to welcome Colonel Melvin Russell, retired, Baltimore City Police Department, as well as Chief Troy Williams, Baltimore County Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. I'd also like to thank you, Reverend Mason. It's an honor to be asked to be the moderator for this very important conversation that we're having today. I've often been very torn in this conversation with police and the public. As I was recruited as a CIA agent in my senior year of college, as well as I was scheduled to begin the police academy as one of 2 Black women in the very white, male-dominant force of Newcastle County, Delaware. I have over 30 close friends who are Baltimore City officers, state troopers in different states throughout the US, all while being a mother of a Black son. I was in high school on spring break in LA with my uncle for vacation when the verdict of Rodney King came down. That was the first time that I'd ever seen anything in regards to police brutality. I saw buildings burning, churches burning. I saw my people hurting in the same fashion that I see today. I prayed to have a son, but now in this day of 2020, I fear every day with him leaving out of my house. Just 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, on my way to a welcoming for Calvert Hall students, I was driving my son for his first interim meeting, and I was speeding. I was pulled over, and as the officer, I had my daughter's car, as the officer asked me to offer him license and registration, I could not find my daughter's registration. So I asked my son to look in her glove compartment for it. As I was looking around, I realized I couldn't find anything, and I wanted to open the door to inform the officer once we found it. However, there was ice on the side of my door exiting near the street. So I told my son to take the information to the officer. My son was 13, going into the 9th grade. When he got out of the car, he began to walk backwards with his hands up. And I was, I guess, as shocked as I am today. I was surprised that he did that and wondered where he learned that and why he thought that was necessary. And immediately, I began to cry because my young son was very aware of what he had to do when he needed to walk toward an officer. That visual still is in my head. And when he became 18 and he received his driver's license, that's something that, as a parent, they're going into their independence and you are supposed to be excited about. And, they finally reached that point. However, the moment he received his license, I became more fearful. The minute he became 18, I became fearful because today, as a Black man, it is so much fear in working with police officers that we are supposed to have a good connection with, who serves us. Police reform isn't about black and white, but police reform is very much about morality. As I welcome the rest of the panel, I would like you all to discuss. Welcome, Dr. Shelton.
It's good to be with you.
Thank you for joining us. I would like first to have opening remarks from Colonel, I guess, Melvin Russell. If you could start, and then I'll go around the panel so that you all can have opening remarks for this evening. We are going to openly discuss police reform. I have a series of questions that I'd like to ask you all in regards to police reform, defunding the police conduct and actions, as well as police officer accountability, and right here, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and the state of Maryland. So I'll start with you, I guess, Colonel and Reverend Russell.
God bless you. And thank you for facilitating us tonight, Ms. Majors. And thank you, Reverend Mason, my friend, for just inviting us to this very, very important topic on police reform. First of all, let me tell everybody right off the bat that I am a component of police reform. I believe it is very, very necessary. I have fought for that for many, many years. As a matter of fact, about 5 years ago, I did a TED Talk on how much that I love the police, but we definitely need reform. I believe policing in America has been broken. I've been yelling and talking about this for many, many years. I am old enough because I put almost 40 years in the Baltimore Police Department. I am born and raised in Baltimore, Baltimorean. I love my city. However, because I started at a tender age of 19 years old in 1979, yeah, that makes me 60. I know I look okay. But since I started in 1979, I came up in an era when everybody was an officer friendly. There was no need for police reform in the sense that we see it in the magnitude today. It wasn't blatant the way you see it today. Most police officers were openly friendly, compassionate, and partners with the community. Everybody knew they were beat cops. They knew the drug cops. They knew the detectives. They knew everybody. Today, the system is broke. It's just systematic racism, systematic politics within the departments. Everything from the bottom up. Just so much is broke, and I'm sad because I heard Mason say this, that there are just a few bad apples, and that is true, but that's been perpetuated throughout many departments. And because there's been a lack of discipline and correctness, they have gotten emboldened and they do more and more, and it makes the whole department look worse and worse. And because those who want to do the right thing and often step out to do wonderful things, they are not patted on the back or they even mocked. So they begin to look diminished, while the bad guys who seem like they haven't gotten, I'm calling them bad guys in badges, thugs in badges, criminals in badges. Even if they started out good somewhere along the way, and I know quite a few that did that, they turned it sour. And I'll just end on this, that too many of our police officers have lost their way and lost the ability to have relational equities with the community. And so, yes, I am a component, not of defunding, and I know we'll talk about that, but absolutely a police reform.
Thank you. We will move to Chief Troy Williams.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, Ms. Majors, for having us this evening. My name is Troy Williams. I am the recently appointed Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Baltimore County. Prior to that, I had a 20-year career in law enforcement, was never a police officer, but I was with the Department of Justice with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and been working in this area of community policing and police reform for a long time, probably about 20 years. And I can remember a time going back to programs like Weed and Seed with the Department of Justice, where we were really focused on trying to create some balance between infusing resources into the community that supported community development, be it economic, be it academic or the like, and then also looking at how we policed our communities effectively, understood our communities, and policed them in a smart fashion. I think I had an opportunity to see the continuum and us move along the continuum to where we find ourselves today. And I think we need to really revisit where we lost our way with respect to policing, quite frankly. And so I'm a big proponent of the reforms, many of the reforms that we're proposing. And I'm actively working with the county to pursue those reforms. I had an opportunity to work with the Obama administration during 21st century policing. And I think that a lot of the tenets that we find there are kind of the pathway forward for us to really think about how we want to police our communities and think about justice in our communities moving forward. So glad to be here tonight and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we will have Dr. Hillary Shelton, Director of NAACP Washington Bureau and Senior Vice President of Policy and Advocacy.
So thank you so much for having me. And it's great to see you all, and particularly to have such an important conversation about police reform. Let me say, I also believe in comprehensive police reform in our country. But look at the policies of the NAACP. After all, we're a 110-year-old organization. We've experienced policing in many different ways across our country. We have 2,200 membership units, putting us in every state in the United States, as well as on military bases in places like Korea, Japan, Germany, and Italy. With all that in mind, we've held hearings on the issue of police-community relations. What we found was disturbing. What we found that in the African-American community, oftentimes, as they discussed the issues and challenges of policing, it was determined they felt that police officers were much more gruff, were not consistent in their behavior towards them or demonstrated a level of respect, more likely to use violence and over the top use their guns in times when people have nothing else in their hands other than, unfortunately, as we've seen more recently, iced tea and perhaps a bag of Skittles. What that raises for us is a number of concerns. Number one, there's really something wrong with the policy. When we've watched many of the outrageous cases that have happened across the country, even those that were caught on video, what we saw is a police officer shooting an unarmed person, male or female. But sadly, we're seeing more African-American women also being killed by police officers on our streets. We've seen more people actually raise the concerns about how it is that we could watch someone shot to death, along those lines, someone unarmed, and a representative of the police department will come forward and almost as if reading from a script will say, we extend our condolences and prayers to the family of the person that was victimized by this police officer. But our police officers did nothing wrong. What they did was absolutely by the book. From our perspective, that means there's something really wrong with the book. As we think about our laws across the country, we're going to have to reset those first. We're going to have to reset them to address issues of racial profiling and the use of force. We're going to have to reset them to address many issues that affect how police officers interrelate with our communities. What we're seeing as we've listened to people across the country as well, we're going to have to address the issue of the power dynamic between our local communities and the police officers that serve us. Are we making sure that those police officers recognize that serve and protect is not just a slogan written on the side of their police cars, but a position that we have to have as we think about even the effectiveness of our police departments? Look, I've been fortunate. I run the government affairs office for the national NAACP here in Washington, D.C. And I've said at one time or another with every attorney general we've had since Janet Reno and the Clinton administration up to the present. And I'll say this, they've all said the same things as we talk about issues of racial and ethnic minorities and policing. They said that programs like racial profiling and the disparate impact against people of color is something we're going to have to address. Until we do, the police will not have the trust and integrity as a perception necessary for them to be effective in our communities. They won't be able to prevent crimes, nor will they be able to solve them. So in essence, it's important we're having this conversation, and I look forward to the rest of it. Thanks a million.
Thank you. Last, we will have City Councilman Julian Jones from Baltimore County Council, District 4. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this forum with this esteemed guest. I have to tell you, I cannot tell you how excited I was to hear Colonel Russell's comments, because I certainly endorse his as well as everybody else's comments here. It is clear that with all due respect, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for the brave men and women of the police department in Baltimore County and people who work very hard to keep us safe. However, it is clear to me that their training has gone astray. Their training has moved to a place where no longer is their officer friendly, or officer friendly is far and few between. They've moved to a place where once upon a time, a police officer would never imagine shooting someone without a weapon. And from time to time, that person may have something that resembles a weapon, and we were all in outrage. But today, police officers have propensity to shoot people who are totally unarmed. And the only thing that matters is the mind of the officer who says, I was in fear for my life, therefore I thought he had a weapon, and therefore I had to use deadly force. And that seems to be the standard where we are today. I think if you look at what's going on in the country, people such as myself have nothing but the utmost respect for police officers. So for years and years and years, faced with everything we saw, the public was saying, I just don't want to send a police to jail. I'm just hoping and praying that they could fix it. I don't want to send a police officer who came to work and made a mistake and send him or her to jail. I'm hoping and praying that they can fix it. But I think we've come to a place now where the community is saying, I can't take it anymore. I've just seen too much. And so many new people are coming to this conclusion that, hey, we just can't take it anymore. Something has to change. So having heard the cries from people in our community, as well as the cries across the country, and I've decided to put forth some police reform legislation that I think in my heart of hearts will make our police department better and try to fix some of the problems that I think police officers today, especially as it relates to training, not all of them, I don't think they can see the forest for the trees. I think in some cases they're just so defensive that somehow there's this notion that if you want to make us better, if you have some complaints about what we do, then you're somehow against us. You're somehow in favor of, you're in favor of lawlessness. And I received a tweet today from the police president of the union, and he shows me that something that Fox put on, and it sort of bothered me a little bit, but I decided to leave it alone because it's like, I'm not standing here saying that I want any officer to be injured or killed. I value all life, and I certainly value their life. But don't think because I'm here to say we can do better, that I'm here to point out where you've done not so good, that somehow I'm against you. I'm not against you. I support the police department and the brave men and women to do the job, but I also support them enough to say we can do better. And that's what my legislation is all about.
Thank you. I'd like to start with retired Colonel Russell. Actually, I'd like to discuss your TED Talk that you had on December the 3rd in 2016, actually 4 years ago, and the relevance of it today. As I watched your TED Talk, I watched it probably a few years ago, and then I watched it again over the weekend. And I was very surprised that your, I think it was 13 or 14-minute conversation was more relevant now. It was as if you were talking in today's environment. I'd like for you to talk about how you had the ability to bring down the crime to an all-time low of 40 years in your district of Eastern District, as well as why was the police department not able to utilize the practices that you'd begun with ministers in the patrol cars, with other officers, why we weren't able to make those type of changes to do some transformation in Baltimore City Police Department?
Well, Tiffany, you said a mouthful there. So let me try to answer that as quickly as I can. I don't want to take up too much time. First of all, going backwards, what you have to understand is police culture. Policemen, policewomen are very proudful people who also think oftentimes that they have all the answers. And what I need to make you understand is, or understand you and the audience is, policing really took a bad turn in the 90s. In the 90s, everybody began to take a big bite of the apple from the Big Apple, and that was zero tolerance. Zero tolerance worked really well in New York for 8 million people and 40,000 police department membership. But people flocked to it, including Baltimore City. The mayor at that time had a commissioner in place that said that's not going to work in Baltimore, fired that commissioner, but rather that commissioner walked away. Let me get that right. But he found someone who would implement zero tolerance in Baltimore, i.e. we locked up 1 out of 6 residents in Baltimore City, and most of them obviously were Black and brown people. ruined their lives, ruined their careers, so forth and so on. And we never turned back to officer friendly because we got so aggressive that all we started to do was exercise. You heard me say in a TED Talk, that protective arm. Someone said earlier about protective serve. I think it was Hillary. We don't serve anymore. We just protect, and that's all we do. We just want to chase bad guys with guns, and we don't want to service anybody anymore. And so I recognized that, and I was very fortunate because I worked 20 years in narcotics. So I went into narcotics in the 80s and came out in 2007. And so by being in that silo for 20 years, I didn't see the erosion of police and community relationships, plus community relationships, churches and relationships. And so when I reemerged back into the public as a patrol lieutenant commander, I was slapped in the face to see all those broken bridges of relationship. I believe we are looking at nationally relational bankruptcy across the nation, especially between police and its communities. What I was able to do is, first of all, let me not pretend and take any credit for this. I'm not ashamed of who I am, and that is I'm a child of God, and I'm a strong man of faith, and I like to believe a man of peace. And when I took over that Eastern District that you're mentioning, I knew I wasn't any smarter than any of the commanders that came before me. I knew they were all smarter than me, way more intelligent than me, just not all more good looking, just plain. But with that said, what I simply did is my wife and I got together and said, look, we got to ask God. I need a vision. If they couldn't figure it out, I certainly can't figure it out. God gave me that vision. What I realized, the implements, the strategies God were giving me weren't really police strategies. They were about winning relationships and winning people. See, it's difficult for community members to not only feel hatred toward the police, but each other if everybody is showing kindness and love towards everybody. I knew this, if we begin to learn to really take care of each other, the crime actually would take care of itself. And so I don't have time to go into it, but we began to do things. I began to challenge the churches because today I'm an assistant pastor. Back then I was a minister. And I challenged the churches that, listen, you used to be in the community as community churches. Now you're commuter churches. Pastors, you're driving back into the community to have your ministry. And now your flock has followed you. You all used to live here. And now you live in what you think are safer neighborhoods. You're coming back, but you did not realize you begin to break relationships and discontinue relationships in the community. Now you don't take care of the community. And I did that in all sectors, whether it's the young people, whether it's community on community, elders with the young people, businesses, how we all became disconnected, and i.e. relational bankruptcy, and we forego our relational equity that we once had. What I was able to do is take us back to the 80s when I was policing and bring back those same principles that we were able to do that made us so successful. My officers didn't want to do it because they were zero tolerance mentality, but I told them, if you're going to work for me and I am the boss, you're going to do this. And so that was a struggle and a fight, and I had to go through it. But within a year, I had everybody on board, and the community was on board because now the community was giving information to the police because what? The community was being serviced, not lorded, not occupied by the police. They were being serviced by the police. The churches were back in the community. We were one big community village again. And when you have a village, you have to communicate. You take care of each other. And that by itself pulled us together in a terrific net of collaboration and drove down the crime. And we tried to do that across the city. And the only way I was able to help a little bit is you had other commanders come to me and said, can you help me a little bit? Not because they wanted to, but because they got tired of getting called in something called a CompStat, called on the red carpet and had to answer for their crime that was just plundering them in the districts. And so they took a little bit, did that, and the entire city went to a 30-year low 1 year. But we maintained our 40-plus-year low. My entire tenure as a district commander was over 3 years that we were able to do that. And I just don't believe leadership. I've tried to get leadership to follow that, but they just don't want to do that type of policing. And we're not telling you to get rid of the other policing, which is necessary, protective. We're just telling you get back in balance. You're all protection and no service. And they basically looked at me and my small staff and said, you guys are soft. You do soft police work. We can't do that. Well, here I sit now, many years later, and I hear the entire nation crying out for more relational policing, more community policing. And so now I kind of sit back and say, like you said, Tiffany, I was screaming about this even before the TED Talk, and now everybody wants to do it. And it's funny. I'm kind of on the outside looking in and just hoping they get it right.
Thank you. I would like to ask Chief Troy Williams, as the Chief of Diversity and Inclusion, can you speak about police accountability You know, we have police officers that, you know, it was an honor to receive a badge to protect and serve. But now it feels like, as a citizen, as a Black woman or man, that now that badge has turned into a certificate to kill. What are you all doing in Baltimore County specifically? I don't want to put you on the carpet, but I am. Um, Probably just about 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I watched a video of a white officer shoot a Black man that had a gun. The gun dropped on the ground, and he proceeded to pick up the gun, but he wasn't able to get it. Ran away from the officer, and the officer shot him several times in the back. And right now, it's justifiable, as it's always justifiable. However, can you discuss that in your county?
Yeah, let me address that in a couple of different ways. First of all, let me kind of talk about it from an experience perspective. I think, police accountability is incredibly important. And I think, police departments really need to have hard conversations and really analyze themselves when it comes to both transparency and accountability. I think one of the things that we were pushing forward while I was in DC was the police data initiative, which was really focused on having police departments begin to expand the data that they were making available to the public, right? I think oftentimes when individuals don't necessarily know all of the information or understand the entirety of the story, then we're going to fill in the blanks as a community. That's human instinct, right? And when you have a breakdown in terms of relationships, it only gets exacerbated and it's worse. So that, as a principle, let me just start there. I believe transparency and accountability is incredibly important. Now, taking that down to the Baltimore County level, we had already begun as an administration to try to move down this road of equity in policing and really thinking about being transparent, right? And so it's a journey. We've started on the journey. We started in, I think, November, actually, of 2019. We were actually, it was brought to our attention that there was disparity in traffic stops for African Americans in Baltimore County. Particularly, African Americans were being stopped probably 2 times their representation in the general population of the county, right? And so, and they represented the largest segment of the population that was being stopped. And so what we did was we established the Baltimore County Equitable Policing Work Group, which Councilman Jones is a part of. And we had all of our criminal justice partners there, as well as the NAACP Baltimore County chapter and some other members. And we really we're taking a hard look at, the data, asking Baltimore County Police Department for additional data to understand the issue, trying to benchmark ourselves against other jurisdictions, and then also reviewing training and general police practices, and also looking at how we measured up with respect to national best practices. So we were in that modality, and then in June, after everything that occurred with respect to the murder of Mr. Floyd, we understood that we had to step ourselves up even further and actually expand the scope of what we were doing. And so more recently, as of June 12th, we announced that we would be updating our use of force policy of Baltimore County Police Department with a real kind of emphasis on both the sanctity of life and the duty to intervene for officers. And then we're also looking at, how we delivered our implicit bias training, and then increasing the transparency of our complaint process. And then probably most important, and germane to the question that you've asked, is we really need to support legislation, particularly with the Maryland Public Information Act, that allows us to increase our level of transparency related to disciplinary cases around officer actions, right? And so oftentimes, and Julian has brought this out and brought it to our attention on multiple occasions, the community sees an incident occur, like the one that you described, the department investigates, and then it kind of seems to go into this black hole of unknown, right? And there's no additional information. A lot of that is hindered by our ability, not necessarily by our ability to speak because of the legislation. And so what we anticipate doing when we go back to the legislature this next cycle is to really push hard to have some of those laws mitigated so that we can communicate what is going on with respect to officer discipline more freely. And then we're also looking at, how is the composition of our department, right? How are we exercising our recruitment practices and our hiring practices? Are they equitable? Are we moving minority candidates out of the process unjustifiably based on our practices? And then finally, we're looking at actually establishing that work group as a permanent fixture in the county that will consistently analyze like how we are doing in terms of delivering policing services in a fair and impartial manner. So we have a pretty big agenda in front of us that we're pursuing, but really it's all with the intention of doing this more effectively and getting back to where the community sees trust and legitimacy in the police department. And we're doing that in concert with all of our partners, so the councilman and everybody. So
as far as transparency,
mhm.
I think we missed it completely because I don't think you answered my question. Or are you saying you can't answer my question?
I'm saying that we could be more transparent with respect to the incident that you talked about, if we weren't as hindered by some of the state legislation to speak on disciplinary issues around particularly police discipline. In terms of the disclosure of data, like traffic stops and things like that, we are moving in a direction that is going to make us more transparent, and we're going to release more data to the public. So we'll have dashboards that actually the public can access and see how we're doing with respect to equitable policing and being equitable in our delivery of policing services.
I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but like how soon? We're in a state of emergency right now. It's urgent. So, as you said, we've been putting these things in place. And we just had another murder. That's supposed to be quiet. We're not hearing a lot about it. It's attempting to be brushed under the carpet. But, as soon as I get more information about it, I'm going to be a whole lot more vocal about what's going on. I don't want to throw you under it, so I'm going to take you off the hot seat and I'll ask others that can speak about it. Because this transparency and this sense of urgency needs to happen now. And we can't wait for, I know there's policy, everything, there's a definite need for systems change, but we can't continue to make that excuse. And we have to, everything is a process. We know it's a process, but in the midst of the process, we have a lot of my brothers dying, and I don't really have a whole lot of time to wait on a couple of months when we can put some things in plan that we know is going on. So I'll take you off the hot seat and I'll ask Dr. Shelton in regards to police officers that consistently have justifiable homicides on individuals because they're either carrying a weapon, if not carrying a weapon, running away with a weapon. You have anything about that?
Well, a number of things. First, let me begin by saying one of the things Troy's raising, I think, is important. And it is we need a change in policy first. I appreciate what's being said about how law enforcement responds. Let me also say this too. I want to make sure that whatever I'm saying is not interpreted as having an animus against police officers across the board. I know some great brothers and sisters that serve our communities very, very well, and we're very grateful for them. It's great to have somebody to call that's watching your back that way, but we have some real problems as well. So looking at the issues as what's happening with the use of force, I would argue that we have a real problem with use of force policies across the country with individual police departments. It is a sad reality that we have as many different use of force policies as we have police departments, and as many different interpretations of those policies as we have police officers, which leads us to a couple other things that have to be addressed and addressed right away. Listen, we just passed the George Floyd Police Accountability Bill in the U.S. House of Representatives. It addresses issues of changing how law enforcement does its business from the very beginning, that first law enforcement encounter between a police officer and a citizen on the street. And what it begins talking about is the issue of challenges of racial profiling. Racial profiling that does create an animus between police officers and people of color. It moves then to address the issue of use of force At what point is it acceptable for a police officer to pull out his gun and use it? I would say that is a big problem because it's too easy for them to do it and end up shooting unarmed people. I have sons. I have a 21-year-old, I have a 24-year-old, and I have a 16-year-old. Black men living in Washington, D.C. I do have to say I'm scared to death. If I didn't know some of the great police officers that are willing to stand up and do watch out for kids and see themselves in those same young men and women that are on our streets, we'd have a bigger problem than we have now. So we have to change the policy. We've got to retrain police officers in how to carry out their responsibilities with that. And finally, and very, very importantly, we're going to have to increase the level of accountability. The communities should be served by the police officers, and as such, if a police officer misbehaves, it is the community that should be deciding what happens with that police officer. It is a real problem, in my opinion. When we have police investigating other police officers, that's like telling me if I file my tax return, if the IRS sends back a notice saying there's a problem with it, I should be able to say back to them, no problem. I will do a very thorough internal investigation, and I will tell you whether I made a mistake or not. We've got to change that reality. And quite frankly, Tiffany, I'm convinced one of the reasons that we have people that are pushing to defund the police, what they're really saying, and I know we're going to get to this question in a minute, what they're really saying is we're going to have to restructure and rebuild our law enforcement program in our country from the bottom up. We're going to have to think about how it affects our children, individuals, families, and entire communities. There's a great way to do that, but I'm convinced that unless we're talking about real issues of accountability as well, we're truly missing the point.
Thank you. Councilman Jones, since we're speaking about police reform and defunding the police, what does police reform, what should it look like? And what does defunding the police look like for you? You're on mute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, as it relates to police reform, I think, again, I agree with so many things that were said here tonight. The idea for me was to go at this in a very strategic way, and my legislation has been sort of crowdsourced in terms of talking with an awful lot of people, many of whom work for the police department and support every letter in this bill. The idea is to really slow down this use of force continuum, if you will. Make sure before you use a deadly force that maybe you should put some time, some distance, some shielding between you and the danger that give you more time. So I heard you talk about Mr. Johnson that was shot and killed over there in Essex. And but what I would much rather you look at is a gentleman named Eric Sapp. This is on I-83. And Eric Sapp's mother called for her son that was threatening suicide, and he was driving under the influence. This is what she said. So she called the police for help. 2 police officers pulled him over in I-83. The officer came up on the passenger side of the vehicle with his gun drawn, telling Mr. Sapp to put this car in park. Eventually, after repeated requests, Mr. Sapp put his car in park. He told Mr. Sapp to put his hand on the dash. At some point, Mr. Sapp says, "I'm getting out of the car." The officer says, "Don't get out of the car." He says, "I'm getting out of the car." He takes his seatbelt off. He opens up the door. The officer goes around to the driver's side of the vehicle, where when Mr. Sapp opened the car door, he shoots him 8 times, 4 in the chest, 4 in the back. In my world, the officer could have simply stayed on the passenger side of the vehicle where he would have had an opportunity to make an assessment as to whether or not this gentleman was a threat or not. There was 2 officers there. There's a whole lot of things that could have happened before we went to deadly force. So in my idea, and that's one of my poster children examples, or one of my poster childs. The other one is when there's a fight at a middle school and the school resource officer calls for backup, and at some point there's a young lady in middle school who's mouthing off to someone, she should not be thrown to the ground with a knee on her neck and another officer with his boot on her leg while they put handcuffs on a young lady that's 14 or 15 years old in the cafeteria in front of everyone. What does that say in terms of community policing? What do you think those children in that cafeteria who was victimized by this scene, what do you think they think of now? So it runs contrary to the whole idea of community policing when you use that type of force on a young girl in middle school. And I guarantee you, if somebody were to do that to one of those officers' children, they would probably be ready to shoot them. So, but for some reason, they think it's perfectly okay to use that type of force on a young girl. So my idea of community policing, my idea of my legislation is to say, hey, we're going to tell you under what circumstances you should be using deadly force. We're going to say what you should be doing prior to getting to the point where you feel it's necessary to use deadly force. One of the things you often hear is police officers say, I have to make a split-second decision. And I'm sure that there are times that they do. But so many times, there are other choices that could be made prior to that split second. There are other choices that can be made besides deadly force. And in my opinion, many of those decisions will put the officer in a safer place versus a place where they feel they have to rush in, confront somebody, and take their life. And one final thing I would add, this is for everyone because I've had friends that say they don't really care about community. They don't care about police reforms. When we have a judgment against Baltimore County for $38 million because of the killing of Corinne Gaines, that is the cost of an elementary school. We are self-insured. So if we have to spend $38 million, maybe you don't care about police reform. Maybe you feel like this is not your problem. But if you care about education, you care about having your streets paved, if you care about the library that you go to or the community college, then you should care about police reforms, because when mistakes like that are made and we get a judgment for $38 million, that's an elementary school that we're not going to build.
Thank you.
Sure.
Reverend Russell, I have a question to ask you, almost in regards to what Councilman Jones just said. We know that in Baltimore City, I've spoken with Commissioner Harris, and I've watched some of his latest town hall meetings in regards to defunding the police. And he's very much in tune with areas of defunding the police. And we need to also put a definition on defunding the police. Many individuals believe that defunding the police is very much so getting rid of the police. You know, that's a total, total different definition. So I would like one for you to discuss defunding the police, what that means or what that looks like in Baltimore City. And as we discussed that, Councilman Jones discussed having a judgment against Baltimore County Police in the murder of Corinne Gaines. But I also want to discuss when you have Baltimore City police officers, the percentage of them that live in the county, to where their taxes, their retirement benefits, when they're done, their lifetime of taxes that Baltimore City residents pay. You know, we're already very much behind in our school system. The Baltimore City police officers, many of them live not only in Baltimore County, Howard County, some of them don't even live in the state. I recall where there was a policy that if you were a Baltimore City police officer, you lived in the city. I know that there was a huge benefit to buying a home in the city, but how does that relate to the interests of the officers who work in the city and their interest in being a stakeholder in the city and being a partner as a police officer, a servant of the community when they don't lay their head down there?
Yeah, great series of questions. First of all, it's never been a policy for any police officer in the Baltimore City Police Department to live in the city. But I will tell you, when I started my career, many, many years into it, if you ask any Baltimore City police officer where were they from, we simply thought you were asking us what area of the city we were from, because we all came from Baltimore City. So over time, that's kind of changed, not kind of changed, that's gone from almost inclusively police officers living in the city became Baltimore City officers. So that talks to recruitment and a whole lot of other things I don't want to get into right now. But as that eroded, it's almost flip-flop where you'd be forced to find 20% of the force that lives in the city. Because you're right, they're living in the surrounding counties, they live in other states, PA. Listen, I'm one of those statistics. I lived in the city for many years growing up, bought my first home in East Baltimore, but I was one of them. As I began to have kids and I began to get fearful, I want to say fearful, but very concerned, because my mission was I have a great compassion for building a quality of life in the city. And as I had more and more children, today I have 8 blended kids from a blended family, and 6 of them are African-American boys. And a couple of them had some of those scary run-ins with police. I've been racially profiled since I've been a police many times. And so I became fearful of them. So my wife and I just decided we have to get to a safer place, i.e. a safer place where I didn't have to be so concerned about them and focus on the job at hand. And that was making Baltimore City safer. And so living away does mean something. I think you're way more invested. Maybe that's why I became real invested in officers during my era, because we came from those cities. You know, I get tired of hearing police now saying, hey man, I can't live in the city, or I can't live in the same district that I work in. Well, I did that for many, many years. You know, I lived in East Baltimore, and I did 4 tour duties in East Baltimore. That's where my house was, my church was, but I was still locking up hundreds and hundreds of guys selling drugs, shooting, murdering, and everything else right in the community that I lived in. And it didn't bother me when I was off duty. I'd run outside if I saw police running down the street chasing a bad guy, the alleged bad guy, and I'd stop him and grab him and tackle him, whatever the case may be. And you know what? Nobody threw rocks in my window. Nobody fireballed my house. They knew that's Mel Russell. He's a police. That's his job, right? There was nothing to be fearful about. I didn't have to be fearful of my kids, but things began to change a whole lot. And so I think we do need to get back to that. A lot of incentives have been in place for many, many years. You're a city employee. You know, this X amount of thousands of dollars come off your house or closing costs paid for, whatever. I think that's good, and we need to get back to that and maybe even more incentivized doing those things, because I think we need to have more people from the city policing the city. I think the best people that can do community policing are people from the community. You know, I don't like this recruitment idea that we go all over the country to find Baltimore City cops. I hate it. And I'm not knocking anybody that wants a job. Some of the best police that we have, because I work with them and they work for me, came out of New York and some other cities. But as a whole, I think the best cops come from those communities. That'd be like me going to Oakland, California, or New Orleans or someplace else and saying, I want to be a cop. I'm behind the 8 ball. I don't know that territory. I have 0 relationships there, and I don't know how effective I could be. As a matter of fact, if I go to a city like New York, I go in and out every now and then, but the police there, I'm probably going to do a little research. I'm going to watch a couple movies. I'm going to do this and that and figure out what's New York all about. And I might have some prejudged biases going into the situation. Just like people coming to Baltimore City, watching The Wire, The Corner, and reading all the bad stuff about Baltimore, because that's what media does. It push out negative stuff. And so at the end of the day, I think it's good that city cops come from those communities that they're going to police. Now, as far as the funding, I like to think that the funding is just, you talk about accountability earlier, Troy was talking about it, Hillary was talking about it, even Julian. I think if we're talking about defunding, meaning having a better accountability and inclusiveness to the funding that we have. Baltimore City, a civic organization, police department, the largest budget in the entire city, almost $500 million, right? Nobody comes close to that in Baltimore City. And it's the only organization that deals directly with the community on a regular basis. How can you be an organization that deals with the public, supposed to protect and serve them, right? Build up quality of life, and you take your funding and you're not allocating anything towards partnerships, anything that has to deal with the community? How is it that you could blame city council, city government, and say, how come we don't have PAL centers anymore? You took them away. If I'm a leader in Baltimore City and PAL centers are police athletic leagues, I'm going to find a way to find funding in my $500 million fund and build out police athletic leagues. If we're the ones who are arresting people and sending them to jail, and there's a huge 80+% recidivism, I'm probably going to fund something called reentry program, because we need to get to these guys and gals and help them redirect their path before they come back out and put in mentorship programs, job training, job placement with our partners that I'm going to invest in, because they got terrific nonprofits out there. Why isn't a huge part of my funding, if we're talking about the funding, that's the only way I believe in the funding,
Right.
if I'm taking part of my allocations of money or reallocating them and putting them into those partners that work, where we are collaborating and we can now build greater quality of life because we're making better youth. I got my officers in school. Why do we take our officers out of school? I'm not talking about school police. Why don't our police officers go into school anymore, right? Why aren't there after school programs where we hang out with them? Why aren't we going to the ball fields? Why aren't we doing other things with our youth? Because tomorrow, if we don't get them, they're tomorrow criminals. So listen, all I'm saying to you is this. When it comes to the funding, when I say I don't believe in it, is because it's just what you're saying, Tiffany. Many people believe it's just getting rid of the police department. And that's what I don't believe in. But I believe in there should be a hearty refunding or a reallocation of funds that will go to the quality of life of the people that you're serving. We ought to be helping them.
Right. You just, pretty much gave us the definition of defunding or reallocation of funds, where you are able to put funds back into the community, as well as use experts that will handle specific situations. Like you said, there should not be an officer called for kids playing in the street, or when a dog uses the bathroom in your neighbor's, yard. Those are things that can be handled and need to be handled by other individuals. And that's what we talk about in regards to reallocation funds.
If I could just take just 30 seconds. So those are things, why can't we as police help re-educate and retrain and help re-empower our community and say, you know what, when I was a little boy coming up in the city, well, Miss Johnson, you remember this. We policed our own community. We weren't scared of them kids in the street. We took care of them. So Miss Johnson, Miss Brown, Miss Smith, everybody in this community, what happened that you became fearful of the kids? You stopped hurting them. And I stopped doing what I was supposed to do and be officer friendly. Why can't we come back and put that system in place? And that's what I used to train our communities. And we began to build up community partnerships just that way. And because we couldn't hire social workers, I jumped on the church and say, look, y'all gonna become chaplain. And all I need you to do is have relational equity. If people don't know who you are, get out my face, because it lets me know you ain't been doing nothing. But if you got relationships with the community, I need you to help, let me train you to go back in those communities with my cops who don't have relational equity. Let them borrow your relational equity and help those two connect. And don't be police chaplains, but be city chaplains. Help the police and help the community and help us reconnect.
I agree. I have a question that anyone can answer in regards to police conduct and actions during the arrest process. And this deals a lot with corruption. As you know, we have a new recent story in the news as of yesterday or a few days ago where, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe a lieutenant was arrested, a Baltimore City police officer who lives in the county, for, several charges that were thrown out as far as kidnapping, all types of things. Can you discuss police reform and corruption? And anyone can answer this.
Well, maybe I can at least start. I really appreciate what Mr. Russell was just saying about what happens when things go well, but the need for, and not to sound like Johnny One Note, policy, this kind of actions he just described in place. What that means is you're not dealing with different interpretations or opinions about the issue. You're dealing with the issue of policy. Here's how this is supposed to be done. Mm-hmm. Absolutely right. As we're talking about issues of how police function, let me also say, just on a little note about police officers living in the communities they serve, there are a lot of advantages. I had a friend here in Washington, D.C. He and his wife lived here, and they took advantage of a couple of things. One, they bought themselves a nice little house in D.C. and used the incentives that were available to them as police officers to get a low down payment, low interest rate and everything else, and stay in the district. There's a policy here that says if you live in public housing, you get to stay almost free, which raises some other issues. Well, let me tell you how that worked out very, very well. They drove their cruisers home every night. He was a uniformed police officer. and parked his cruiser in front of his house. The community knew they had a police officer living there. And from time to time, maybe this is a little challenge for those who live in communities, they would knock on his door and say, you know, we need a little help with this. Can you come out and give us a hand? Being a member of that community meant he would go down the street and help take care of problems, prevent problems. If a husband and wife got into a heated argument, husband came home from work, stopped by the bar, got a little something more to drink than he should have, walked into the house and got into a fight with his wife, raising their voices very loudly. Local neighbors called the police, say, look, I don't know exactly what's going on, said, but they're getting awfully loud there and I'm fearful violence might erupt. And so what this guy would do, the next door neighbor would do in this case, he goes down the street, knocks on the police officer's door and said, look, you know Fred that lives down the street, right? So yeah, they're getting a little loud. I'm a little nervous about something breaking off. Can you go and check in on him? And what would happen is he'd walk down the street, knock on the door and just say, look, I heard there's a little challenge going on. Is everything all right? Do we need to take a walk together? You know what I'm saying? And work things out to prevent it. They love having a police officer right there in the community. And quite frankly, his very presence, I would argue, helps save lives and other challenges in the neighborhood. It's a great idea and it ought to happen. We believe that certainly police officers that know the communities, every community has its own culture. You know what folks are doing on certain nights of the week and everything else. You know where the grocery store is and you know who the troublemakers are to keep an eye on. Community is not perfection, but community means we know a little bit more about each other, care a little bit more about each other, and make sure that those that we pay to provide the very crucially important service of law enforcement are there to actually do it on behalf of the people that live in those communities. So we want to see those changes. The policies need to change. Let me say the George Floyd bill was a great start along those lines. From racial profiling provisions to use of force provisions to accountability provisions, all those are part of those bills. So if you take a look and see what's happening, let me say your congresspeople have been very helpful to us there. My guess is they'd love to talk about how we can transition some of those new federal policies into local policies as well. It's all about accountability and trust. So that means that the people that live in the neighborhoods should have oversight. They should be the ones that are part of police accountability review boards that we also strongly believe in. A police accountability review board that has real power and not one that just has the name. We've seen some of those as well, in which the resources come from the captain of the police department. The captain of the police department decides when they want to convene the police review board. They look at the case that he wants them to take a look at and comes back and gives them the results of their looking at it. And then he decides what's going to happen with it. That is not independence. That is not full funding. That is not subpoena power. That's not the other things that we need, including a police accountability review board that can actually engage the prosecuting attorney's office when the police officer's behavior rises to the point of being criminal. Let me also say, make this last point as well. We think it's very, very important that police officers do their jobs and do them well. We need them to do that and have a lot of respect for those that do them very, very well. I happen to live 2 blocks from my local police department here in Washington, D.C. And I love stopping and talking to the men and women that do such a wonderful job for us. They know who my children are and point them out. They'll even tell me when I bump into them from time to time, I saw that boy of yours skateboarding down the street. Looks like he got a new skateboard. I said, well, that must be Joshua. They said, yeah, I think that was Josh I saw doing those things. We can have a vision for effective policing, a vision that brings everyone into the role, pays them well, because let me also say, as we've looked across the country, we have too many police departments that don't pay our police officers what they deserve. We want to make sure they're paid well so we don't run into other problems along those lines as well. Bottom line I'll say here, Tiffany, is what we want to see is real changes. We want to see a police department that we're utilizing more time looking at non-lethal weapons, by the way. For some reason, when we look at cases that happen across our country, like for instance, in Ferguson, Missouri, and I'll stop right after this, I promise. We looked at Dan Wilson, who was the police officer that actually shot Michael Brown to death. What we saw is a 6'4" tall man that on one side of his police belt, he had his service gun. And on the other side, he had a taser. And in the very front of it, he actually had pepper spray. So in essence, he had a couple of non-deadly tools to utilize in law enforcement, but for some reason, it was okay for him to pull out his gun. That permanently hurts people and kills them. We haven't talked about those that have been shot and can no longer work or fully function in our society as well. That's pretty bad too. But when he talked about what he saw in Michael Brown, this 18-year-old kid that was scheduled to start college the very next week at the University of Missouri in St. Louis, he said he looked at him and what he saw in his eyes was not a lie. What he saw in Michael Brown's eyes was something evil. It reminded him of something like an animal. If you want to see exactly what I'm talking about, read the transcripts from the grand jury in the Michael Brown case, and you'll be absolutely outraged to see that somehow or another, this man who didn't even see this Black kid as being a human being was able to shoot him to death. I'll leave this last point with you on that as well. Some people asked, as we looked at the news and everything else, why was it that this police officer was doing what he was supposed to, or wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing? Well, the bottom line is that for those who've gone through police shooting training, I've done the fast thing just to experience what it's like to be behind that gun and whatnot during those crazy times. And I saw is training that says you basically shoot first, but you shoot for the larger areas. That is, you shoot for mass in the body. When I took the test with the FBI, I got in trouble because I decided when I went through the testing, the process and whatnot, it was like a real high-tech video game, by the way. I shot the guy that was running away from me in each of his shoulders and both of his legs. And when I got my review from the FBI officers doing the training, they said, well, you hit him in all the places you tried to, but you didn't hit him in the right place. You were supposed to shoot for mass. When Michael Brown was killed, the police officer was supposed to shoot for mass, and some of the consultants on the news talked about it in those terms until they saw the autopsy report and realized that Michael Brown was shot twice in the face, as well as shot in the massive areas. In essence, we have a real problem when we have those kind of things happening. And for that matter, Dan Wilson lost his job and had to leave Missouri, but quite frankly, Dan Wilson should be in prison now. We've got to change the policies, change the training to go along with the policies, and increase the oversight by communities to make sure that they're seeing what their police officers are doing, and that police officers know that they have to worry about doing the right job, or there are these people that have the power to actually take my job from me.
Can I speak to the arrest? Just dovetail a little bit. Anyway, let me just say this. Arrest, I think you really have to look at, first of all, let me say this, that hundreds of arrests are made in Baltimore City, and I'm sure in Baltimore County every day, good arrests, hundreds. And I will say this, that when you see those bad arrests that come out, use excessive force, lives are being taken. I think you really have to look at leadership. That's from the informal leader. That means a partner that's out there with them that refused to say anything because of the protection of that thin blue line. So leadership from the formal leader to the sergeant all the way up to the top cop. I'll say this, to have rules in place without consequences when those rules are broken, and I'm talking about internally within the culture of policing, that leads to greater abuse of power. Greater abuse of power, which eventually we see what we have today. It leads to rebellion and it leads to lawlessness. And that's what we're starting to see because people get fed up after a while. If you don't know how to police your own, then you know what? We're going to start rebelling and we're going to start becoming lawless people because you're not properly protecting and serving us. So I would say this, leadership, along with the training, everybody's talking about training. I'm a starch believer in training. I don't think proper training is taking place. I think we put training in place to just check off the boxes, if you will, and then we keep it moving, but not the real training that's necessary. But at the same time, I think leadership needs to call balls, strikes. Stop showing this favoritism. Stop having this internal systematic racism where blacks get punished greater than the white officers. There's so much that's wrong within a system of policing and a culture that you see what you see. And so until we see leadership, again, informal and formal, get it right. And stop worrying about your position. Stop worrying about your popularity. Just look down the middle of the road and call it, like I said, balls. And I'm gonna tell you, the men and women of that agency will respect you more because they will say, that's a fair man. Even if I'm the person who was in the wrong, I have to eventually come to myself and say, you know what? He treated me fair. I might have got fired. I might even be going to jail. But because of what I've done, in my heart of hearts, I know it was wrong. I wasn't trained like that. I knew better. That's a fair man. When we can start putting leadership like that in place, I think then we'll see a better police department across the country, because we really do try to protect our own. We really do protect that thin blue line. We really tell the entire world. I know Baltimore started there. We tell the community, stop snitching. Why don't y'all get off of that stop snitching? And I kind of chuckle at it, because I look at us and say, we ain't snitching on each other, but you want the community to stop snitching? Come on, man. Come on, follow the leader. We're supposed to be the leader. Start snitching on your own cops, and maybe we'll start snitching on some of our community members. I'm done with that.
Thank you. Chief Williams?
I would just echo, I mean, when you listen to what folks have been saying, they're talking about training, they're talking about citizen oversight. We're really essentially talking about culture change. And so even going back to your earlier question, when I guess I was on the proverbial hot seat, when you start talking about transparency and you want an answer to a specific incident tomorrow, the real issue is this work takes time. This work takes resiliency, commitment, and shared collaboration across everybody's perspectives, right? And so, I could not do anything more than probably echo everything that everybody said. Yeah, we should incentivize having police officers live in the community, but more importantly, we need to incentivize making policing a profession again and having people vested as stakeholders in whatever communities they serve. And I know that the gentleman here, Colonel Russell, I've seen him in action. And those are the principles that we need to bring to the table. So it's long-term work, it's commitment, it's resiliency, and you have to kind of stick with it.
What do you think, Chief Williams, is necessary for the community and the officers to build that bridge to partner with each other? I know that has been lost. I believe it was Russell that spoke about PAL centers. I played on police athletic lead in basketball from 2nd to 8th grade. That I couldn't wait for the officer to pick us up and take us home. We had rivalries with the other PAL centers. It was a big deal, and we respected our officers then. There's a lot of disrespect on both sides. On both sides. What is necessary to build that where we support? Because nothing is going to change unless the community is involved as well. And when we have the ability to be able to look at our officers as our supports, as protect and serve, and not as our enemy, that we continue to see, on TV. TV and social media is giving all officers a horrible, horrible light.
Yeah, I think that we need to continue, number one, to have real meaningful discussions like we're having tonight, but not just with the people that are here on this panel. You need to have the disengaged young people in those conversations. Our faith leaders need to be in those conversations. Every stakeholder in the community needs to be in those conversations. Even the FOP needs to be a part of those conversations, right? Because ultimately we're all stakeholders in the outcome. And so I understand the defunding movement. I'm actually, that's a decades-long discussion if you really want to be honest about it. There was a time when we talked about 2/3 of our funding was going to law enforcement activities, with 1/3 going to prevention and intervention activities. We need to reorient that paradigm, right? And think about how we can effectively restructure those resources like Colonel Russell talked about. So I think it's a confluence of all of those things, right? Understanding people's needs and where they are, meeting them where they are, and then trying to come up with targeted strategies that are going to assist them in kind of all of us achieving the universal goal of public safety. So, I think it's going to take a collective effort. It's going to take time, and it's going to take candid, honest discussions. No more kind of hiding in plain sight behind whatever your role is. One of the first things I did with our equitable policing work group was ask everybody to step out of their designated role and be citizens that are concerned about achieving the goal of equitable policing in Baltimore County. So I think, we need to put down the titles, we need to put down the pomp and circumstance, get to real conversations and come up with real solutions as a community.
Thank you. Councilman Jones, in regards to specifically with what Chief Williams said in regards to the disengaged youth and those are marginalized communities, how can we support them and also bring resources to these areas that are that are unserved and underserved, where we continue to have mass incarceration, when we have school to prison pipeline, when we don't have support systems in our community, and I speak about Baltimore City pretty much because that's the area that we serve for the Urban League. We serve individuals that feel as though they don't have a voice, where it's a wall against the children and the parents, against the police, where they feel lost and left. They have nothing. They can't see, they can't see the road from behind the trees, where it's hopeless. Baltimore City is one of the most resilient places I've ever been. We can overcome everything, but where do we go when we put all these things in place, but we don't involve the individuals who are going to have to abide by those? What do you all do in the county that's different as far as providing these resources to individuals that are in poverty areas, that are in areas that are left? We don't have rec centers. We don't have PAL centers. We don't have, this community engagement with those who feel like they're left out.
Unmute, Julian.
You're on mute.
Thank you. First of all, I was thinking earlier about what you said about your son getting out walking backwards. I had a similar experience with my nephews, and I spoke with them, and he was telling me this story, and part of the story included the police pulling them over and how they all put their hands in the ceiling. The reason I bring that up is because if we want to have better relations with the police officers, we have to stop the type of policing that automatically causes kids to automatically get into that mode where they're fearful, distrustful of the police. That's the first thing. The other thing is, I was a fire chief for 32 years. And so I've been a public servant. Now I'm in the realm as a county councilman. And the thing that I just want to say to everybody is hold your elected officials accountable. Make sure they know what you want and what you expect. And then hold them accountable. Make sure they hear from you. I see some of these signs, and these signs are beautiful during these protests. I've been to quite a few. But one, a couple of them really stuck out. One said, "Stop pretending your racism is patriotism." And another said, "They keep killing us and we keep marching." Well, what I'm here to say is this. If we know what we want as a community, and if we look at the history of our country, nothing happened just because, right? Whether it be that this country breaking away from the British, whether it been civil rights, women's right to vote, you name it, all of these things happen through struggle for people standing up, making demands. And what I find so interesting is it's good that we're marching. It brings awareness. It's good that we're having discussions. It brings awareness. But at some point you have to
You're frozen. Can you hear us?
It's a good pose.
procedure, and a policy and a procedure is something that people can implement and unimplement without so much as having any public input at all. But a law is a process. It takes time to make that happen, and it takes the public input to make it happen, and it takes the same thing to undo it. So what I would say is, whether you're in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, or wherever, if there are things that you want to happen in terms of distribution of resources for youth, whether it be PAL centers or rec centers or schools, get on your elected officials and let them know what you expect and what you demand. I mean, I've been in office and I've seen small groups of people who are dedicated constantly come to every council meeting and advocate for their position, even to the point where the people around me said, I'm tired of seeing those people. What can we do to stop them from coming here telling us about what they want? What can we do for these people? And I don't care what the motivation is, those folks eventually got what they came for. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take people to stand up and hold your elected officials accountable.
Thank you.
Sure.
Somebody else? Dr. Shelton, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I've just agreed that the importance of advocacy is very much there, and holding people accountable during that process is also extremely important. So saying what you need to the people that can make the decisions, those who have been elected or appointed for that matter, is always crucial.
Councilman Jones, when you said that the similar situation happened with your nephews and you wanted to get to a point where they didn't have that interaction or reaction, and the response from the officer said, son, you did the correct thing. As scared as you are of me, I am of you. And it almost put more, we were in Baltimore County. It was like a sting. Like, he's a 14-year-old little boy. What do you mean? He did right. He didn't do right. I'm glad that he knew to put his hands up and protect himself that way, but that's not a behavior that anybody should have to consistently do. He wasn't even driving, he's a child. So that response from the officer was, cultural that, no, you are supposed to do that. And he told him, you did exactly right. I'm glad you did that, because as scared as you are of me, I am of you. And I was just appalled by that response.
Well, let me say this. That's where the training comes in with our police officers. That's where, I'm not an expert, right? But it is my understanding that from the time these officers get in the academy, they're drilled in their head, safety, safety, safety. Everybody can kill you. The nun sitting in a wheelchair can pull out a shotgun and kill you, so keep your eye on her. And if you don't see her hands, it's this type of training that causes these officers to behave the way they do. I don't think, in my mind, that an officer goes out here wanting to kill somebody. I don't think it, but I believe that they've been injected with this training to be so fearful. Like, I've had an officer tell me, because we've debated it back and forth, and he says, a reaction will always be slower than an action. So we're always behind the bad guy. I said, I understand that, but what about when there's no weapon involved? What about when there's no reason to feel like, I gotta be reactive to something? But that goes back to the training. And so many other times, we want to do everything to instill good relationship with the police department. But I think we are missing the boat if we think a PAL center or some other type of Saturday event is going to create good relations with the youth. What's going to create good relations with the youth is if, when the police officer shows up, the youth don't feel fearful. If you're going to throw a 13 or 14-year-old girl down in the middle of the cafeteria and put your knee on her neck, all the PAL centers in the world is not going to change the perception of those children in that room to the police. It's just not going to work.
Thank you. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time, and I want to bring back Reverend Mason. I know he had some additional questions or information that he'd like with our panel. Does anyone else have anything that they wanted to discuss in regards to actions in the arrest process, police reform, police accountability, or defunding the police department?
Let me just add, in terms of the arrest process, I certainly agree with the comments being made about it being overly aggressive in too many cases. I believe that the intention is to actually create a level of fear in whoever is being apprehended, which creates some other problems as well. Again, we're really going to have to rethink I believe the impact of some of the processes that are in place now. And again, I also believe that a very comprehensive reform process is going to be necessary. So I would only recommend one additional thing as someone that thinks about policy quite a bit. And that is, need to take some time to think about what our communities really need and what they really want in those that provide this particular service. It's always crucial along those lines. There always has to be an opportunity to do just that. Final thing I'd say about those particular pieces as we're thinking about, again, review boards, which I do believe are some of the best tools that we could utilize to help maintain, not just create it, but maintain the balance is absolutely crucial to be effective in our communities. Is that people having a place they can go and complain when a police officer misbehaves. That place should not be in the police station itself. It again is outrageous to think that someone would want to go into the same place that houses the police officer that was just abusive to them and whatnot, and go in thinking it'll be okay to be able to file those complaints. Let me also finally say, as we think about that complaint process, I've seen video footage of some of my friends that have done hidden cameras as they've trained young Black men to go into police departments to simply ask for complaint forms. And I've seen video footage in which some police officer listening, even late at night, as a young man comes in the basic hip hop attire, just like a brother that lives down the street, and asks for a complaint form. And the police officer behind the counter says, "I'm not going to give you anything until you tell me who it is you want to complain about." And the young man trained in it's the same ways that we used to train those young people that go to the lunchroom counter. As the crowd began to become more gruff and radical towards them, they were taught to be cool the whole time. And this young man did the same thing. But we were able to watch on the cameras that were attached to his body, that police officer that walked out the back door, snuck around to the front door of the police department, and literally tackled the young brother to the ground because he would not tell them who he wanted to complain about. And he simply wanted to take the complaint form home, fill it out, and bring it back to explain the problem he was having with that police officer. We've got to deal with those issues as well. It's a comprehensive reform process we're talking about. It's absolutely going to be necessary. Policy, training, accountability.
Thank you. We have two questions on our question and answer. And the first one is, what is our united ask / demand for reform when we do finally get the attention of our elected officials? There needs to be a cohesive demand so that the elected officials have finite ideas to answer to.
Well, let me say this. My bill is online with the Baltimore County Council. You can look it up. And we publish all of our bills. It's been all over Facebook and everywhere. And my ask to people have been, hey, call your elected official. If you live in Baltimore County, call your county council person and ask them, do they support the bill? And if not, why? And why you think they should support the bill? Because at the end of the day, if they get a pass, I mean, I would love right now to have 4 or 5 co-sponsors, but the
Frozen again.
Okay. Well,
I'll go to the next one. Are police departments doing a thorough background check of applicants for the department? I believe that racism goes deep with the application process. You were frozen, Councilman Jones. I'm sorry. I apologize.
I will say, for me, coming out of the system that I was in, there's a lot of shenanigans going on. I have a lot of, just about everybody, because I was so old being in the police department, and there was a time when I knew everybody. I consider anybody that ever worked for me or come to ask me a question on my sons and daughters. So I had hundreds and hundreds of police sons and daughters. And throughout the years, several of them worked through recruitment. They would tell me horror stories, and I would try to get them to come forward. Because of that thin blue line and that code, they just were fearful. I don't think how much I coached them to say it's the right thing to do. But they would tell me there were quotas. You don't hire a Black until you get 10 whites in this department first. They were pushing humongous amount of files to the side of qualified. I think I heard Troy talk about it earlier. Qualified applicants, push them to the side because they were African American. because they came from the inner city. And so there are things going on within our system, and that's why we need a real overhaul of policing. You can't tell me in a great city like Baltimore City, we should have a problem, even with everything that's going on now. There are enough young people that are sick and tired of the way policing is done that you can convince them, you come in and help us fix it. But for some reason, we're not getting those young people in. And that's not because I don't think they're applying, because I think a lot of them are applying, but they're just not being selected.
I would add the issue of screening,
Mhm.
thinking about who should be in policing. I mean, too often we have people that are influenced by Hollywood. You know, they want to be like the last Die Hard movie, you know, ride or die, and those kind of issues. We want the right people in policing as well. Everyone's personality does not work well under the kind of tension and other challenges that are in law enforcement. Screening is important. It's also important to see if there are any pre-existing prejudices. I mean, those that go into law enforcement sometimes have a belief if they grew up in a community that's homogenous one way or the other, they have stereotypes about people that are different. Look, Baltimore is a very diverse city, racially, ethnically, and otherwise. You have people that come from all over the world to live in Baltimore. Understanding the value and the disparities the differences in those cultures is extremely important as well. The training is going to be important, but again, the training has to be clearly tied to new policy. And the policy has to talk about how we interact with each other. What's a police officer's role when they come up to meet somebody new on the streets, perhaps in the communities that they serve and so forth? We want to make sure that we put in place those issues as well. Let's not look at this as a reaction, but as the positive actions of effective law enforcement. We've seen it happen in some communities, and quite frankly, we have to find ways to frame the policies of oversight, the training, and the accountability. If you don't do it right, like any other job, you could lose this one. So indeed, I think all those issues are going to be important. Screening at the front end is crucial as we begin that process.
Let me dovetail into what Hillary was saying, because I totally agree. My wife said something to me about 2-3 weeks ago that I thought was very insightful. You know, when we review applicants coming in Baltimore City, you talk about their associates, you ask about their associates, you have any gang affiliations, you have any friends who are felons. But we never asked, especially for a predominantly African-American city, we never asked things like, you know, are you a nationalist or associate with any nationalists? You know what I mean? Do you associate with any KKs, or you're a member of the KKs, skinheads, white power, any of those things? And so it's very slanted. And if we're going to be fair across the board, let's be fair across the board and ask those things that none of those are good qualities. Not being a gang member, being affiliated with gangs, to being a nationalist or, you know, KKK member, none of those things. And we should be asking all those questions.
I would just chime in there. I think, you know, the disposition is really important. And, you know, I think the recruitment and hiring, that's why we are actually trying to get a third party to look at our entire system, because we want to make sure that we have diverse classes coming into the department. But just as importantly, I think when you start talking about the issue of retention, we need to have early warning systems in place so that we know when officers that we may not have identified as issues at the front end may fall off the rails through, you know, whatever the case may be, influence of their FTO or other officers. But we need to have early warning systems that let us know when we have problematic officers on the force so that we can take action more readily.
Can I make a point on just that for a second? Just a quick point. One of the things that we found as we looked at police departments across the country is that usually when incidents, these extraordinary incidents we're talking about happen, unarmed people being shot, you know, the kind of violence we've seen coming from the law enforcement side of the equation, most often when we see those kind of things happening, the same police officers in those police departments are often responsible for that problem. Keeping data on police officers and the complaints they receive from the community is another crucial step forward. How is that officer responding when they get out there? They can do the no sir and play the Eddie Haskell number when they're in the police department. But when they're out on the streets, how people are responding to them is also crucially important to their effectiveness and the possibilities, again, of some violent action occurring in that community.
And I would say what Hillary is saying, and definitely Troy, going back to what you were saying, early warning systems, how in the world do you have a police officer still on the street interacting with the community? They got 16, 17 open complaints and use of forces. They got a supervisor that got 20 plus use of forces. So you know they're covering each other and protecting each other. So those early warning systems, there's no way in the world you should have that many complaints. And we know that with George Floyd. There's no way in the world you should have that many open IAD complaints and still be out there policing. Come on.
Great.
Early warning system, that was beyond early warning.
I had a question earlier. Whether to abolish qualified immunity is hotly debated nationally. Will removing this protection be beneficial or harmful?
I would argue be very beneficial. Police officers being held accountable for their responsibilities. When dollars are on the line, law enforcement oversight usually responds much more loud and more clearly. And very well in these cases, we want to make sure that happens there too. It's important. That kind of what we're seeing now, that and a combination of one of the policies that we're concerned about is we have some places across the country in which a police officer doesn't even have to respond to his involvement in a violent action for 72 hours or longer. In other words, what is viewed by the public, again, is we're thinking about who we can trust and who we can't trust. They think that 72 hours means I can corroborate my story with whoever else was around me. I have time to think about it and whatnot. And maybe I'll be careful. And so we see in too many cases where a police officer will go back and write the report and forget he had his body cam on. And the report doesn't correspond with the body cam footage. Those issues raise some real concerns for us. Again, this is a comprehensive problem. It's going to require a comprehensive approach.
No, I love the FOP, but quite frankly, way too powerful, way too powerful to the point where we become untouchable. And listen, you can't have it both ways. Cops can't tell the community, I'm a man too, I'm a daughter too, I'm a mother, I'm a son. You got to look at me like a human being, but at the same time, you are untouchable, right? Because you have immunity. We're not so special to say all those things. To me, it's saying that we're superhuman, we're special. You got to give us extra privileges, and we're not, because we're just like our brothers and sisters in the community, except we wear a badge and a gun, and we sworn to uphold and protect the law and keep the peace in the land. So yeah, I think that immunity thing needs to go out the door. And at the end of the day, I think it puts back accountability of making sure you do your job properly. I don't know why, unless you come in wanting to be a bad police officer, wanting to do some ill-gotten gains and be corruptible, I don't know why that would make you fearful. I don't need listen, treat me just like everybody else when I get in the jackpot. I don't need to be treated special, right? And I dare say you're not going to find many police officers going to agree with that, because they want their cake and they want to eat it too. And I'm sorry to say, but you can't have it both ways.
I agree. We are coming up on 8:38. I have one last question before I turn it back over to Reverend Mason. And that's when are we going to put in effective practical principles in place for our most vulnerable populations, the home and mental challenges, and those suffering from substance abuse issues? Do I need to read that again?
No, sure. Right away now. Look, the way police departments are set up and the rules of engagement police departments are set up at the local level. That means as we think about our city councils, our county councils, and otherwise, they have the authority to do it now. We've waited too long to put these policies and programs in place. We can do it now. There's a great book, as a matter of fact, it goes back to the middle 1990s. It's worth taking a look at. The NAACP had Charles Ogletree, law professor from Harvard University, do an assessment in our country after the Rodney King incident. Rodney King is historic for a whole lot of reasons. I won't go into too much of that, just take a lot of time, but Dr. Ogletree actually joined the NAACP in holding hearings all over the country. East Coast, West Coast, North, South, central parts of the country and otherwise. Went to various communities to talk about community policing relations. The study ended up being called Beyond the Rodney King Story. It's over a 500-page report, but you can always read the summary. But what he determined as he went into communities, which is always important to providing a service to anyone, is how do you feel about those that are providing the service and how do you want that service provided? When he found out whether they were speaking with a New York accent or a Southern twang, they were all saying the same thing in the Black community. We feel they're overly gruff with us. We feel that they're going to pull out their guns a lot faster and pull the triggers a lot sooner. In other words, they felt that they could not trust the police, and the police would very well take their lives for no good reasons. What came out of that study was also a number of recommendations that I think fit well with local communities like that in Baltimore. What they talked about is how the policy should be set in place for everything from recruitment, training, oversight, accountability. They talked about police accountability review boards and a 10-point litmus that addresses those issues as well to make sure that it's done right. In other words, I think you have the opportunity. There's plenty of information. If you need to hold a few hearings in Baltimore, do it. Let's get the data and whatnot, and recognize that the decisions that are being made here should not be made by the police departments themselves, but by the people that live in the city of Baltimore and the county of Baltimore that are the ones that are paying for this service and need effective policing. If you ask me, do we need to get rid of the police departments? Absolutely, absolutely not. If you got rid of them, I need something that would help provide some security and protection for me and my community. I need someone that I can reach out to when there are emergencies going on around my neighborhood or in my house. We'd have to end up recreating it. Perhaps that's why there are those that are saying, we want to actually get rid of the police departments. Many of them are saying, so we can start over and perhaps get it right this time.
Should police officers have licensing as any other professionals, or is the police academy suffice enough?
Oh, no, I think they need certification, but I'll stop there. I've been talking an awful lot. And they should be recertified every year to make sure they can still live up to the challenge. We need to certify police officers that's showing that they can do everything we need them to do. Can they de-escalate a situation? Let's make sure they remember how to do it. So let's recertify them every year. We're putting human lives in their hands. There's probably no more valuable thing we can do, something that when they make the mistake, you can't take it back.
Well, I think that goes to training too. So listen, I know in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, there is annual in-service training. So they are getting retrained every year. Let's just make sure that training is the proper training and they're getting recertified. I know you can't go back on the streets if you can't pass us. You can't pass the gun range, you're not going back on the street because we don't need innocent bystanders if you happen to discharge a weapon getting shot. So I know those things are in place for most of the 18,000 police departments across the country, but we just got to drill down with accountability of the particular type of training. Are we still training like it's 1970, 1980? Or are we training like it's 2020?
But can I just say, Russell, I strongly agree with everything you just said. Let's make sure that the training and the accountability is not limited to being able to squeeze that trigger.
That's right. That's right. Agreed.
Or does that include mental health screening?
Yeah.
That's a big piece that, it's like police officers are exempt from consistent mental health screening.
Well, let me say that I feel like that weekend fisherman with Jonah in a room as I'm saying this in front of Troy and Melvin. But I'm sure the pressures that you brothers have experienced in the law enforcement community is something that no one can really understand well if you haven't been there. I've talked to a lot of brothers and sisters that have been in those positions and whatnot, and I appreciate what they have to be put up with. But I also appreciate that kind of pressure has got to lead to challenges with how you think about things and, quite frankly, how you end up managing your day. It is important that people that put in those highly pressured positions have the kind of support they need to continue doing a great job as well. The last thing we need, I would want to have in any place, is someone that we've so well armed with the kind of ammunition, guns, and other things that we give to police officers these days and whatnot, being in a position where they're just at the end of their rope. And someone says something to them they don't appreciate. And what we see happen is many of us saw on TV, a woman was upset about what was going on. She was going through an airport and the person that was helping her through decided to punch her in the face. We can't have that happening. We need to provide support to those police officers. We give them such a high level of responsibility. We need to set the accountability high, but we also need to set the support high as well.
You know what?
Officer
wellness is very important. PSDT is no joke. Most officers, I believe, carry that, especially if you serve any type of time crime fighting in Baltimore County or Baltimore City. I'm grateful that Baltimore City, I did a lot of advocating, and finally in 2017, we got an officer wellness unit into the department, but it was volunteer basis, right? It's needed, but you had to volunteer to go. What officer you know is going to volunteer to go knowing everybody else is knowing you're going there because everybody's going to think you're crazy. So this needs to be a part of a blanket training for everybody because we all need it. At the end of the day, we all need it because we're all suffering in some capacity.
I think it just reinforced the need for the early intervention systems too. Because like you said, oftentimes officers are going to try to cover that up or play that tough guy role and really be walking around in need of some services. So,
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I didn't want to say it here because, or maybe I won't say it, but let me just say this.
Say it.
They are, one of the things I've been thinking about, I was in drafting my bill, I spoke to a lot of officers and I gathered a lot of information. So one particular officer was explaining to me that in certain areas like child sexual abuse units, they have a grant where every year, every officer sits in front of a psychiatrist for 1 hour. And we were talking about how that would be a good thing for every officer. Because like the colonel said, I came from the fire department. We had a critical incident stress debriefing team. And early on, it all counted on you to say, I need help. And no one would say they needed help. So then we got to a point where we said, well, if you go on these type of calls or this call where somebody was burnt alive in front of everybody, we're going to make you go. And that was, I think, was very helpful. So as a screening process, it's probably a good idea to make every officer go and sit in front of a clinician for 1 hour a year, and they could take that hour and use it any way they want. And it's probably a good idea because we probably can catch some people with some serious issues, because the fact of the matter is the suicide rate for police officers and firefighters are higher than the national average of anybody else. So those stresses are playing a role on these people. So it's probably a good idea so that we can probably catch some people with some issues. It's just something we're working out right now. We had a meeting about it today, so we'll see how it works out.
I've tried to bring back Reverend Mason a few times. I'm not sure if he's still awake. There you go. There you go. I'm gonna have you guys do closing remarks, but he's awake. It's all yours.
Madam Moderator, if I was not the host of this event tonight, I would decline to step in after the stupendous job that you have done.
Amen.
I think you deserve a well-round ovation. Not just for you.
Panelists.
There we go.
Somebody going to the bathroom? What's going on?
Panelists have been dynamic.
Trying to be creative. And as well, you could not have been the moderator that you have been if you did not have the panel
Absolutely.
that you had. Let me kind of stick to my script. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Ms. Majors, President and CEO, the Greater Baltimore Urban League, for an outstanding job moderating this evening's town hall. And to each of our panelists, Dr. Shelton, Senior Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for the Washington Bureau of the NAACP, Chief Williams, Baltimore County's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Councilman Jones, Baltimore County District Number 4, and Chief Russell, retired from the Baltimore City Police Department. Thank you for your time, for your knowledge, and valuable information for which you have shared with us this evening. And then to you, our viewers in attendance, for your involvement. As insignificant as you may think it seems, it has actually said to those who have experienced injustice that they matter. Yes, Black lives matter. Brown lives matter. And red lives matter. The fact of the matter is, all lives matter. And in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Let me say, due to the overwhelming interest and great attendance and response, I am announcing this evening that there will be a Town Hall 2 scheduled for Monday, August the 3rd, 2020 at 7 p.m. We will have a different moderator, as well as having different panelists from various counties around this state. We need to continue to have conversation and dialogue until we get to a place where we can agree to disagree and come up with practical solutions to save not just our young folks' lives, but in some cases, our very own. We cannot do it by ourselves. As I've often said, none of us can do everything, but all of us can do something. Just as a footnote, I believe Councilman Jones is having a town hall meeting on tomorrow evening, I believe. Is that correct, Councilman Jones?
No, sir.
It's not correct. Okay,
Not correct.
not correct. All right.
We will have one. They're working on it. We will have one during this month before people have an opportunity to testify in favor of the bill or against the bill, which is August the 28th. I mean, July the 28th. And then we will vote on the bill on August the 3rd. And the point that I was making earlier, and I'm not sure how much of it came across, but I wanted people to hold people accountable in terms of calling their council members, asking them, do they support the bill? If not, why? And why you think they should support the bill if they do not.
Okay. All right. Somebody sent me some bad information, and I'm glad that I was able to get that clarified. Just as a footnote, on this coming Thursday, we will have Baltimore County Executive Johnny O will be on our talk show at 8 p.m. on Let's Talk About It. Each of you are welcome to join us and share as we dialogue about some of these same issues. Well, it's time to go. I want to thank you again for your participation. Each of you know how to reach me. I am available to assist you in your efforts to bring about change, to help our community. I am not new at this. You can check my record. I have been in the trenches for many, many years advocating for people that have been disenfranchised. Once again, let me thank you for your time, for your knowledge, for your information, and your participation. I trust that each of you will have a great evening. Because we are virtual, I don't have to ask you to be safe in your travels. But once again, be blessed and have a wonderful night. Thank you again, and God bless you.
God bless you all. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You're
Love
welcome.
you, family.
Have a
Love
blessed
you out there. Hillary, give me a call.
But I will. I look forward to talking with you.
All right. God bless.